John Livesay, welcome to Partnering Leadership. I am thrilled to have you in this conversation with me.
I'm excited to be with you, Mahan.
John, you are known as the pitch whisperer, and you're also
Yes.
an outstanding storyteller, which I think is essential for leaders to know how to sell their ideas and communicate their ideas effectively. But before we talk about that and your books, would love to know whereabouts you grew up and how your upbringing has impacted the kind of person you've become.
Mm. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and that Midwest value of if you say you're going to do something, you show up, big on integrity, keeping your word, helping other people. If someone was stuck in the snow, you didn't know them, you would still get out and help push the car out of the ditch. I was a lifeguard growing up, I was on the swim team, and that was a big impact on my life, especially on the day that I had to save a little girl from drowning.
Oh,
And
wow.
I realized that all of my training, normally I was just blowing the whistle and telling kids not to run on wet cement.
Yeah.
But when you needed it, the training of being a lifeguard kicked in because I practiced it so many times without me having to think about it or be stressed out and not panic and stay calm. So that lesson from being a lifeguard, I turned into my TEDx talk, which is called Be the Lifeguard of Your Own Life, because I don't think anyone's going to come save you, unlike in a hurricane, when disruption happens. So those were some of the key values. And then I went to school at the University of Illinois and majored in advertising. I was then, still am, fascinated by what motivates people to change their behavior. How do you get their attention? And a really good ad, whether it's a commercial or something in print or what online, tells a good story.
That's fascinating that you've studied it and you also practice it. As you said, stories help people remember your message. So advertising
Yeah.
requires that story. But before we get into it, I would love to know, since you've been involved in studying and practicing advertising over all
Mhm.
these years, in
Mhm.
what ways do you think advertising has changed?
Oh, wow. First of all, there used to be a huge emphasis on print advertising. Magazines were big. The September issue of Vogue used to be as big as a phone book, and people, what's a phone book? And people used to advertise in yellow pages. I think the big shift is everything going from analog to digital. Print is not as popular or well used because digital is a lot more measurable, but you still need to tell stories digitally. So that doesn't change. No matter what the platform is, the need to connect with somebody emotionally and break through the clutter is the biggest challenge advertising has. And so even us as entrepreneurs and leaders, we need to break through the clutter. If you're a leader and you're trying to recruit top talent, you need to tell a story to get the top people to leave a competitor to come to you. People have to understand your vision to stay loyal. All of that requires storytelling. But the biggest shift in advertising that I can see is people's attention span is shorter than ever on social media. I was recently interviewed by Adweek on recent Super Bowl commercials and figuring out which of those tell the best story. So there's still the few events that people watch live and actually get involved with what the messages are. And it's the brands that make you feel something that you remember and then ideally to talk about.
With the attention spans getting shorter, it requires us to be able to tell those stories
Hmm.
in shorter formats so they resonate. I just finished the meeting. I'm involved with the Economic Club of Washington, John. Finished the meeting, and actually, this was the topic of conversation. Some of the branding and the need for storytelling with the branding to resonate with a broader audience. Now, what was it that got you to recognize the need for storytelling? Because to
Hmm.
this day, there are a lot of ads that I see, and a lot of advertisers, in my view, don't get the
Right.
fact that what resonates is effective storytelling.
When I was selling advertising for Condé Nast, which has big brands like GQ and Wired and Vanity Fair, um, would get a call from Lexus when I was living in Los Angeles agency saying, we looked at 15 different brands. We've narrowed it down to 5 and we're going to pick 3. So we're going to have a media day and everybody gets to come in for 30 minutes back to back and tell us why we should run this launch of a new model in your brand instead of another brand, but don't talk about numbers. And Mahan, half of the reps were deer in headlights. What? I can't talk about circulation or the reader's income. I don't know what. And I realized from my advertising background at an agency, doing commercials for TV when movies were coming out on home video, that whoever told the best story was going to get the sale. And I realized that stories have to be three things. I call them the three C's. They have to be clear, concise, and compelling. If they're not clear and you confuse people with a bunch of acronyms, people always just say, no, it's too hard. I'm out. Concise, to your point. Why does it need to be concise? So that people can remember it and, more importantly, repeat it to other people. So the agency would hear all the pitches, they'd make their recommendations, and then they would have to present that to the client. And if you're the one that told a great story that was clear, concise, and compelling, they could remember it and repeat it, and they become your brand ambassadors. And of course, the final one about why does it need to be compelling, we have to feel something. If the stakes aren't high in a story, nobody cares. So stories have to tug at our hearts in some way, shape, or form to have us feel something, because at the end of the day, we buy emotionally and then back it up with logic.
A lot of leaders that I interact with, John, a little different from your character, Carl. In your book, Carl is skeptical of storytelling. Many of the leaders I interact with, at this point, they get it. Maybe a few years ago, they were
Correct.
challenging the idea of storytelling is for
Right.
salespeople or for motivational speakers.
Yeah.
They get it, but have a very hard time actually doing it. What is the difficulty with doing it?
It's so funny. As a sales keynote speaker who talks about how to tell stories to win sales, I used to have to convince clients of the need for storytelling. And once I've connected those dots, that whoever tells the best story typically gets the sale, they start to say, oh, the reason we're not doing it is we like to revert back to our old pattern of pushing out facts and figures, because we are still stuck on, this is so logical. Why aren't you buying this? And I remember talking to an executive search firm who said, we compete against two other firms. And I see this in law firms and architecture firms. Almost everybody gets in a final three and you each get a chance to come in and pitch. And they say, oh, we always hope we can go last because whoever's last is memorable. And I went, well, hope is not really a strategy. And once the CEO understood that whoever told the best story, even if you went first, would be the one that's memorable, it shifted everything. So part of it is the hesitation of, oh, storytelling, I'm not a good storyteller, or I'm already good enough, I don't need to be better. And then I hear people going, oh my God, that person thinks he's a good, or she think they're good storytellers, but they ramble on and on. I can't remember half of what they say. There's no point. They never land the plane, so to speak. So I think there's awareness that you need it now, which is great. That's why I'm always getting inquiries to come teach our team how to tell stories of why we do what we do. And so people have an emotional connection. And then once they realize that there's a structure to it, and that unlike having to be a great athlete or a major singer, it's not this unique talent given to just a few. Literally, storytelling is in our DNA. People sat around in the cave days and told stories, and it just taps into a different part of our brain. And once you have a structure and a little bit of practice, you can get to the level where people really want to hear stories from you because you've learned the right structure and the way to tell one. And of course, the real secret is when you tell a story that other people can relate to so much, they see themselves in it. That's when the magic happens. And they want to go on the journey with you as their Sherpa.
That is really important, whether it is in sales or in communicating anything to a team or an organization. A lot of the CEOs that I interact with need to communicate change as a part of their strategy to the people in their organization. So storytelling, as you said, becomes a great way to bring people along. But part of what you mentioned is as long as you have the structure and you practice it, you can become good at it. So what
Correct.
is that structure, if not once upon a time?
Let me give you a story, and then I'll give you the structure in the story. It'll make a lot more sense that way. So Olympus Medical hired me as a sales keynote speaker, and they said, we have this machine that makes surgeries go 30% faster. And again, very logical. Why aren't doctors buying this instantly? So we turned it into this story. Imagine how happy Dr. Higgins was down at Long Beach Memorial 6 months ago, using this equipment when he could go out to the patient's family an hour earlier than expected. And if you've ever waited for someone you love to come out of surgery, every minute feels like an hour. The doctor put them out of their waiting misery, said, good news, the scope shows they're going to be fine, there's no cancer, and then turned to the rep and said, this is why I became a doctor, for moments like this. Now that rep tells that story to another doctor who sees themselves in the story and says, this is why I became a doctor. I want your equipment too. Olympus said, oh, that gives us chills. Not only are we not telling stories, it never occurred to us to make a patient's family a character in the story. So the structure is exposition, like you're a journalist. Who, what, where, when. We know the doctor's name, the hospital's name, the location, how long ago. You need to paint the picture so that people feel in the story. Then the second step is describing the problem. The better you describe the problem, and the stakes have to be somewhat high, the better people think you have their solution. In this case, what does it mean for the surgery to get done an hour earlier? Yes, the doctor could do another surgery maybe, and the hospital could make more money, but what really matters is that patient's family not having to wait. And I pull you in if you've ever waited for someone you love. And even if you haven't, you can imagine how painful that would be. So that's really a great showing of the problem. And then the solution, obviously, is the doctor coming out and saying that they're going to be fine. But here's the secret. All good stories have that fourth magical step, which is the resolution. What is life like now after? And in this case, it's dialogue said in present tense. So you're eavesdropping in on the conversation. That's why I became a doctor. And that's the magic. Without that resolution part, the story would be okay, but not enough to get people to want to go on the journey with you.
What a beautiful example, John, to describe those four parts. First of all, as someone who has waited for loved ones in a waiting room,
Oh, yeah.
I can relate emotionally to that.
Yes.
It does have that genuine emotion in it. Additionally, much of marketing, sales, or communication places the individual telling the story or the company at the center of the story. What you've done with this process is you've flipped it. It's not the company that is at the center of the story.
Absolutely.
It is the patient and the doctor. They are at the center of the story. I love that way of looking at it.
You nailed it. The big takeaway for everybody is when you tell a story, you're not the hero. Your client is the hero. You're the Sherpa or Yoda in Star Wars, helping them get that outcome. And that's why you want to have multiple stories ready to go, like a jukebox or a playlist has songs ready to go. So you're telling the right story to the right person at the right time. So if you're talking to a CEO of a hospital, that's a very different story than you are to a doctor. If you're trying to convince a doctor, which they were in this case, then you tell a story about a doctor being the hero, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, you have different stories depending on who the avatar is, and then they're the hero. That's the best way to get someone to see themselves in that story.
John, one of the struggles that I see with some clients and others is the fact that they have a tough time capturing stories and thinking in stories. When you're working with clients and organizations, how do you help them uncover these stories? Because when one individual in the organization uncovers a story, I imagine everyone can use that same story. How do you help organizations do that?
One of the best ways to capture stories is to create a repository map or a Google Doc even, but a repository map where physically where the reps are located, you could click on that and up pops that rep's story of origin as well as their case story. And so you can start sharing those stories. It's a great onboarding tool for new hires to get to know their colleagues, as well as to start selling other people's stories until they make their own success stories. And here's the real exciting part of it is it can also help break down silos. And we see so many companies siloed divisions that aren't cross-selling. And when the stories are all in one place, people get hesitant in the past to make introductions to a different division. Back to the Olympics example, we've got one hospital using one of our three divisions, but the other two, they have to start from scratch. The rep has just been hesitant to make that introduction because they don't even know what to say. But, oh, I've memorized a 2-minute case story. You might want to talk to Melissa about this story. Boom. Now they're not only increasing their own sales through sharing stories, but breaking down those silos. And that's really where the growth comes too.
It can bring people up to date, both from a credibility perspective and even emotional connection perspective to the organization, the impact that it has. Now, you have referenced a couple of times case stories rather than case studies. A lot of organizations have case studies of success. What is the difference between a case story and a case study?
Oh, the word study automatically makes you think of homework from school and left brain analytics. And usually there's no story in a case study. It's here's the facts. Here's our client. Here's how much they spent with us. Here's what they're doing. And maybe a testimonial if you're lucky. Pretty dry. And you go, well, good for them. What a case story does is what I just gave the example of Olympus. And why that works, because there's an unspoken question everyone has when people are evaluating what to buy or hire someone. Will this work for me? Case studies don't necessarily make you feel like that's going to work for you. Case story, if you're telling the right story, will, because you see yourself in that story. That's the biggest difference.
It's a powerful difference. Again, I see a lot of case studies, but they are, as you said, done based on the facts, and they're much more organizational centered.
And rarely are they concise. My goodness. I was given a series of case studies to go through and turn into case stories, and some of them were 3 pages. And I had to turn that into a 1.5-minute case story. And clients aren't going to dig through that. No one's going to read all that.
So, as leaders are thinking about communicating to their teams and their organizations, you talked about the structure of storytelling that they need to think about. Are there stories in addition to client stories that they should have and be able to tell?
I think there's 3 big stories you need. Most people jump right into what the product or service is without any story. But I think the most important story is your own personal story of origin, what you asked me to do at the beginning of the interview. I was working with an architecture team and helped them win $1 billion airport renovation project. That's how high the stakes were. And they said, I'm going to pick the firm we like the most because you could all do the job or you wouldn't be in the final 3. And they said, get John in here. We don't even know where to start. We just show our designs and hope that's enough. So we looked at the team slide. And I said, what are you saying here? I've been here 20 years. I do this. I lived here. I lived there. I did this. Bob, what made you become an architect? Oh, when I was 10, I played with Legos. Now I have a 10-year-old son. I play with Legos with him. I still have that same passion. Fantastic. How about you, Sue? Where were you before here? Oh, I was in the Israeli army. Okay. I bet you learned about focus and discipline. And since if you're the team that gets picked, you'll be the one bringing this project on time and under budget. You got the perfect background. So those little stories of origin make the potential buyer feel like they know you a little bit. Oh, that's who I'd like to work with on this for the next 5-6 years versus just the dry stuff. So that story of origin is a great way to build rapport and be memorable.
John, that is absolutely brilliant and essential. Whether it's architectural firms, law firms, there's so many different organizations where they are pitching. And what you said is exactly right, in that they wouldn't have been selected to be one of the final presenters if they didn't have the credibility and the capability to deliver. Going in and restating that we are capable to do the job and giving data and facts doesn't do it. And that origin story helps people connect at a deeper, emotional, more memorable way. So that's an outstanding way to differentiate yourself.
Nice. So you got your story of origin, you've got your case story, but in the middle is the company story. And again, this is not a dump of facts and figures. We have this many offices around the world. We've been in business this many years, blah, 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 blah. But no, I want to hear a story about how you've taken your values and put them into action. If you're all about diversity or sustainability, have a story ready to go about how that came about, how the employees volunteer, whatever it is that makes that company's culture come to life. That again, this other company that you're pitching says, you know what, we value diversity and sustainability as well. And the story you told us about how you're executing those really makes us feel that this is the right company we want to do business with, separate from the person as well as the case stories of other clients.
It helps differentiate stories the companies tell, moving away from the data, even in
Yes,
this level, to that storytelling.
exactly. Yes. And giving people a sense of what it's like to work there and why clients love working with it. Because remember, they're evaluating how well does this team get along? Is there going to be a bunch of finger pointing or a bunch of collaboration? And instead of saying it, you show it in a story.
That is outstanding. Now, how would you think through the storytelling process in the need for change and bringing people along on that change process?
I think one of the best things the leader can do to get people to embrace change is to give an analogy. And of course, we all went through the pandemic and the isolation, and that was change that we all can relate to. And some people thrived, and some people were just completely stressed out and overwhelmed, had mental health issues around it, and all kinds of things. So, what is the difference? The same event happened to all of us. Part of it is our mindset, part of it is our support group, part of it's our own individual situation. Are you alone? Do you have family? All that is. And if you can give people an example of a time when they went through change and came out better on the other end in some way, shape, or form, and you go back to those dark days when it first started happening and people thought this will be over in a couple of weeks, and then you hear 18 months and people go, what? I can't possibly not be seeing people for 18 months. And the fear, like you should be cleaning your boxes when they come in from Amazon, and all that unknown extreme behavior. Now looking back with different perspective, there's a lot of disruption that happened to all of us, and we still figured out how to keep that alive. So example, back to Olympus. One of their values is flexibility. So they put that value into action during the pandemic and said to their employees, we're all working from home now. And we realize that your kids aren't going to school and you are not set up A, to work from home, and B, to be homeschooling your kids. So we're going to be doubling down on the flexibility on when things are due. And if your kid walks into this Zoom call, it's not going to be the end of the world. And people really appreciated that. And so if you can give people a sense of there's a lot of unknown happening, and we're in this together, and we're going to figure out. So the next disruption, the next amount of change. Listen, I see this all the time. I was just speaking to WEG, which is a big multi-billion-dollar company that makes electrical motors around the world. And they had to change from one software system to another. And everyone resented it, hated it, fought it. But on the other end, there's some productivity and efficiencies that happen. So you as a leader have to listen and then tell other stories of how that decision was made. It wasn't a rash decision. Give people a sense of, I understand why this is frustrating. It's not always going to be this frustrating. Do you remember when you learned how to drive stick shift or whatever it is that they can go, oh yeah, that was hard and jerky at first. Yeah, this will be eventually as smooth as that gets. So I think analogies can really help leaders.
I appreciate the thought behind analogies in helping people understand that we have been through change, we can go through change in the future as well. And I imagine some of the personal stories that the leaders tell can play a role in the credibility that they have, that you can come along with me on this journey, that I'm not sure where we are headed, but you can trust me. So when you're guiding leaders on telling their origin stories to their teams, what do you recommend in the storytelling that leaders need to do in establishing additional credibility in leading their teams?
I think one of the best things a leader can do is show some vulnerability in their stories they're telling about themselves. Nobody wants somebody who's always perfect and slick and never had a problem, never slipped up, never made a mistake. So owning that, owning the fear, having a story of it, whether it's something from your youth or whatever the situation is, makes people feel like, oh, okay, this is a human, not some robot running the world here, that this person has stumbled and gotten stronger and learned lessons from it and has the ability to listen and pivot. And I think that's the biggest thing that everybody wants is, are you authentic? Are you vulnerable? And are you communicating? And if there's a change happening, you're going to let us know why and when, so we're not caught off guard. It sounds so basic, but you can't imagine how many leaders don't do any of it.
I agree with you because I see it. And it is not enough just to say it. You can express it through that storytelling. That's why what you talk about with respect to storytelling is really important. Now, one of the other things I love that you share, John, is your 555 method. As we are going through ongoing change, many of the executives I interact with are incredibly stressed with the amount of change they're facing. What is your 555 method?
We all are going to get aggravated. We're going to get disappointed. We're going to get rejected. We might even get betrayed. So, what is the tool? And so, I created this concept of thinking of yourself as the movie director of your own life. And you zoom out and you ask yourself, let's say somebody cuts you off in traffic. Will this bother me in 5 minutes? How about 5 hours from now? How about 5 days from now? Good Lord, if you're still thinking about somebody cutting you off in traffic 5 days from now, there's a problem, right? The whole point of the 555 is it's easy to remember and easy to start using. And when I introduce this concept in my keynote talks to companies, then they start embracing it, because the whole goal is, how resilient are we? How fast do we get back up after we've been knocked down? And the faster we let go of something, the faster we're on to the next thing. If you're holding on to a rejection in sales, or you feel betrayed by an employee or whatever it is, you're not in your best mindset for the next opportunity and creativity. You're still rehashing that story. So if something like you lose a big sale and you're like, okay, we're going to talk about, everybody can complain and whatever for the next 5 hours, and then we're done. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to email about it. It's done. So get it out of your system. We're going to give yourself 5 hours. And of course, it can even help you in your personal life. I remember when my dad died about 10 years ago. I wish I'd thought of this, because if I could go back to my younger self, 5 days from now, I was still in heavy grief. So I have to do it again. So 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years from now. So I could go back to my younger self. I'd say, 5 years from now, you're still going to miss him, but I promise you, you won't be this sad. And so it can work for your career and your business life, because we need to get back up fast and let go of things faster. So now people are emailing each other and they're emailing me. Something happened. It was not pleasant, whatever, but I 555'd it much faster than I would have without this tool. The benefit and the joy of spreading the word about 555.
I absolutely love it, John. I really like Stoic philosophy, and what your 555 does is it makes some aspects of it much more applicable. So what I find is I ask myself, will I feel this way 5 minutes from now? And
Yeah.
in many instances, it could be yes.
Yeah.
5 weeks from now, and then put it in context, sometimes 5 years from now, really helps put things in a lot greater context. And
Yes.
I find it gives me peace and then changes the way I interact with the world around me. So it's a great way to control our own emotions, which can get
Yes.
out of whack.
Yes. Nobody likes to be rejected. Nobody likes a no, especially if you worked hard on a pitch or whatever it is, or you're hoping you're going to get a job or a promotion or on and on. Like, I was flying back from the sales keynote talk in Atlanta, and as I was on stage, I said to the audience, the only place there's peace of mind is in this moment. Not what somebody said to me. Like, when I first got up there, the microphone that the CEO was using wasn't working, and they had to swap out the one I had for his, and then we had to change microphones on stage. That's not the way I like to start. But if I had let that opening and that little tech glitch throw me off, I wasn't in the moment, right? So something in the past, I let it go. I'm completely present with them. And then I said, I'm getting my phone's blowing up with ice storm information and flights being canceled. I may or may not get home tonight. Does it help me while I'm on stage to be worrying about that? No. I'm totally present. I'm doing what I love. That's what defines happiness for me. And so that perspective, when you're with a client, whether they're pitching them or they're an existing client, be 100% present. That's the biggest gift you can give yourself and other people.
It is a wonderful gift. And I also appreciate your books better selling through storytelling. And the sale is in the tale, which is a story about storytelling.
Yes, the business fable.
Read as well. In addition to your books, are there any resources or practices you recommend to leaders for them to become more effective at storytelling?
using the structure that we talked about, the 4 parts, and then practicing stories to your teams or your friends and saying, now I need a checklist. Was it clear? Was it concise? And was it compelling? And how can I adjust that? So the more you practice and have, oh, I forgot the exposition or I forgot the resolution. So if you use that structure and then combine it with the 3 C's, as you practice to get feedback, you become a better and better storyteller.
There's a huge difference between knowing what we're supposed to do and say and being able to do it. And bridging that gap is important, comes through practice and getting feedback. So how can the audience, John, find out more about you and your work?
If you take out your phone and you text the word pitch, Pitch, to 66866, you get the first chapter of The Sale is in the Tail for free. And you can follow me on social media, The Pitch Whisperer on Instagram. And if you can't remember anything, my name or the book title, just Google The Pitch Whisperer and my content shows up there.
I really appreciate your work, John, both from a storytelling perspective and how leaders can communicate their messages more effectively. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts with the partnering leadership community.
Thanks for having me on, Mahan.